Emily closed her eyes as the warm water cascaded down her body, washing away the stress of a long workday. With her husband Mark away on a business trip for the past 3 days, she had been looking forward to this moment of peace. The house was quiet, just the way she liked it when she wanted to relax. She turned off the shower and reached for her towel, wrapping it loosely around her body. The soft cotton barely covered her essentials, but she didn't mind. After all, she was alone in the house and planned to take her time getting dressed. Her skin was still damp as she stepped out of the bathroom, small droplets of water trickling down her legs. Just as Emily was about to head to the bedroom, she heard the front door open. A smile spread across her face. Mark must have come home early to surprise her. It wasn't unusual for him to change his plans without telling her, especially when it meant getting to see her sooner. "Mark," she called out playfully, adjusting her towel. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." She walked toward the entryway, one hand holding her towel in place while the other pushed back her wet hair. The surprise that awaited her, however, was far more than she had bargained for. There stood Mark, keys still in hand, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were James and Daniel, his 2 college friends whom Emily had met several times over the years. All 3 men froze at the sight of her, their eyes widening in surprise. "Emily," Mark gasped, his face turning a shade of red she hadn't seen before. "Hi, I thought you'd be dressed. I texted you that I was bringing the guys over." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she tightened her grip on the towel. She hadn't checked her phone since before her shower. A wave of embarrassment washed over her as she realized how exposed she was. The towel suddenly felt incredibly small, barely covering her from chest to upper thigh. "I didn't see any message," she managed to say, her voice higher than usual. I'll go get dressed." James and Daniel had the decency to look away, though not before she caught the appreciative glance that passed over James's face. Daniel stared intently at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. "We can wait in the car," Daniel offered, already turning toward the door. No, Emily said quickly, backing away. "I'll just be a minute. Make yourselves at home." She turned and hurried to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Her heart was still racing, but as she leaned against the door, she realized something strange. Alongside the embarrassment, she felt a rush of excitement she hadn't experienced in a long time. As she dropped the towel and began to dress, Emily caught her reflection in the mirror. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes seemed brighter somehow. The look of appreciation she had glimpsed in James's eyes had stirred something in her, a reminder that she was still desirable, still capable of turning heads. It had been a long time since she had seen that look in Mark's eyes. Their marriage had fallen into a comfortable routine, and while there was nothing wrong with comfort, she realized now that they had lost something along the way. The spark, the excitement, the feeling of being wanted, all had gradually faded without either of them noticing. Emily put on a casual but flattering outfit, applied some light makeup, and took a deep breath before rejoining the men in the living room. The atmosphere was tense as she entered, but she smiled warmly. "Sorry about that," she said, trying to sound casual. "I didn't hear you come in." Mark crossed the room and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, but something was different. His arm lingered around her waist, and she noticed him looking at her with renewed interest. She wondered if seeing his friend's reactions to her had reminded him of what he had at home. As the evening progressed and they ordered takeout for dinner, Emily noticed Mark staying close to her, his hand finding excuses to touch her. A brush against her arm, fingers grazing her back as he passed. Each touch sent small shivers through her body, awakening feelings that had been dormant for too long. What had started as an embarrassing moment was turning into something unexpected, something that might just change everything. 3 days had passed since the awkward encounter, but Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. She found herself replaying the moment in her mind while cooking dinner, during her commute to work, and especially at night when Mark's arm draped over her waist as they slept. What surprised her most wasn't the embarrassment. It was how quickly that feeling had transformed into something else, something that made her pulse quicken and her skin tingle with awareness. Mark had been different since that evening. The way he looked at her had changed. His gaze lingered longer when she dressed in the morning. His goodnight kisses were deeper, more passionate. It was as if seeing his friends notice his wife had reminded him of what he had. "You're quiet today," Mark said, joining her on the couch with 2 glasses of wine. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere in their living room. Still thinking about what happened with the guys, Emily took a sip of wine before answering. A little, she admitted. It was embarrassing, but what? Mark's eyes held a curious gleam as he moved closer to her. It made me feel something I haven't felt in a while, she said softly. The way you've been looking at me since then. It's like when we first started dating. Mark's hand found hers, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. James mentioned how lucky I am, he confessed. Said I must never get any work done with a wife who looks like you. Heat rose to Emily's cheeks. He didn't. He did, Mark said, moving even closer. And he's right. Sometimes I forget how beautiful you are because I see you every day. But seeing you through their eyes. His voice trailed off as his free hand moved to cup her face. Emily leaned into his touch. So you're saying I should parade around half naked in front of your friends more often, she teased, though her voice was husky. Mark's eyes darkened. Absolutely not. But maybe we both needed a reminder of what we have. His lips found hers, and the wine in Emily's glass nearly spilled as she responded to his kiss, with an urgency that surprised them both. She set her glass down on the coffee table, without breaking the kiss, her hands moving to his chest. I've missed this, she whispered against his lips. Me too, he replied, his hands sliding underneath her shirt, fingers warm against her bare skin. The rain continued to fall outside as they rediscovered each other on the couch, clothes discarded in a trail leading to their bedroom later that night. The next morning, Emily's phone chimed with a message. It was from Mark, asking if she wanted to join him for lunch. They hadn't had a spontaneous lunch date in months, maybe even years. The routine of marriage had gradually erased these small gestures of romance from their lives. At the restaurant, Emily was surprised to see not just Mark, but also James waiting at the table. Her steps faltered slightly before she continued forward, memories of her towel-clad encounter flashing through her mind. Hope you don't mind, Mark said, standing to kiss her cheek. James had a break between meetings and wanted to join us. James stood as well, his smile warm, but his eyes carefully respectful. I promise I called ahead this time, he joked, and Emily found herself laughing despite her initial discomfort. As they ate, Emily noticed how Mark's hand kept finding reasons to touch hers, how his eyes would meet hers across the table with a heat that made her stomach flip. It was as if he was staking his claim, reminding both James and Emily herself that she was his. The conversation flowed easily, but underneath it was a current of awareness. When James excused himself to take a call, Mark leaned close to her ear. He keeps looking at you, he whispered, but instead of jealousy, his voice held a note of pride. Makes me want to show him exactly why you chose me. Emily felt a rush of desire at his words. This possessive side of Mark was new and unexpectedly thrilling. Maybe we should skip dessert, she suggested, her voice low. I need to get back to work soon. Mark's eyes gleamed with understanding. I'll make an excuse to James. 20 minutes later, they were in Mark's car in the parking garage of her office building, kissing like teenagers who couldn't wait. Emily was late returning to work, her hair slightly mussed and her lipstick reapplied hurriedly. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Emily realized that what should have been one of the most embarrassing moments of her life had somehow breathed new life into her marriage. The spark they had lost was back, burning brighter than before, and she couldn't wait to see what would happen next. The weekend arrived with a surprising announcement from Mark. He had invited both James and Daniel over for dinner on Saturday evening. When he told Emily, she nearly dropped the mug she was holding. You invited them both? After what happened? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. Mark wrapped his arms around her from behind, his lips finding the sensitive spot below her ear. I thought it would be nice. Besides, we need to show them we're not embarrassed. And he paused, his hand sliding down to her hips. I kind of like how it's been between us since that day. Emily couldn't argue with that. The past week had been like a second honeymoon. Every night they had fallen into bed together, rediscovering each other with an urgency that left them breathless. Mark had even surprised her in the shower yesterday morning before work, something that hadn't happened in years. Fine, she said, turning in his arms to face him. But this time I promised to stay fully dressed. Mark's eyes darkened slightly. That's probably for the best, he said, though his tone suggested he might not entirely mean it. Saturday evening arrived quickly. Emily spent more time than usual getting ready, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on a simple blue dress that hugged her curves without being too obvious. She applied her makeup carefully, adding a touch more mascara than usual. "You look beautiful," Mark said when she emerged from the bedroom. He was setting up drinks in the living room, ice clinking in glasses. "Too beautiful. Maybe you should change into something less." His eyes traveled over her appreciatively. Emily laughed. "You're the one who invited them. Besides, it's just a normal dress." The doorbell rang before Mark could respond. Daniel arrived first, bringing a bottle of wine and carefully avoiding Emily's eyes at first. The initial awkwardness faded after the first drink, and by the time James arrived 20 minutes later, they were all laughing about a story Daniel was telling from their college days. To Emily's surprise, James wasn't alone. A woman with dark hair and bright eyes stood beside him, her hand comfortably linked with his. "This is Sophia," James introduced her. "My wife. She was in town unexpectedly and wanted to meet everyone." Sophia smiled warmly at Emily. "James has told me so much about you. All good things," she added with a wink that made Emily wonder exactly what James had shared. The dinner was more relaxed than Emily had expected. She found herself genuinely enjoying Sophia's company. The woman had a sharp wit and an infectious laugh. When the men moved to the living room after dessert to watch the end of a game, Sophia stayed behind with Emily, helping to clear the dishes. "So," Sophia said, her voice lowered as she loaded plates into the dishwasher, "James told me about his unexpected view the other day. He said Mark hasn't stopped grinning since." Heat rushed to Emily's face. "Oh God, he told you about that." Sophia laughed softly. "We don't have secrets. He also said it made him think about us, about how sometimes we forget to really see each other." She paused, looking toward the living room, where the men's voices rose in reaction to something on the TV. "After he told me, we had the best night we've had in months." Emily was surprised by Sophia's openness, but also strangely comforted by it. "It's been like that for us too," she admitted. "Like we needed to be reminded of what attracted us to each other in the first place." Sophia nodded understandingly. "Marriage gets comfortable. Comfortable is nice, but sometimes you need that spark." She dried her hands on a kitchen towel. "James has been looking at me differently all week. I should thank you." They joined the men in the living room, and Emily curled up next to Mark on the couch. His arm went around her shoulders automatically, pulling her close against his side. She noticed James and Sophia on the loveseat, their heads bent close together, fingers intertwined. As the evening wound down, Emily caught Mark watching her with that same heated gaze that had been lighting her up all week. His fingers traced small patterns on her shoulder, each touch sending tingles down her spine. When their guests finally left, Mark closed the door behind them and turned to Emily with a look that made her breath catch. "You know," he said, moving toward her slowly, like a predator stalking its prey, "every time James looked at you tonight, all I could think about was how you're mine." He reached her, his hands framing her face. "And how much I want to remind you of that right now." Emily's heart raced as his lips claimed hers. One thought flashed through her mind before she surrendered completely to his touch. Sometimes the most embarrassing moments turn out to be unexpected gifts. 2 weeks after the dinner party, Emily received a text from Sophia asking if she wanted to meet for coffee. Emily was surprised but pleased. She had enjoyed the other woman's company and found herself agreeing immediately. They met at a small cafe downtown during Emily's lunch break. Sophia was already there when Emily arrived, 2 steaming cups on the table in front of her. "I hope you like lattes," Sophia said with a warm smile, pushing one of the cups toward Emily. "Perfect, thanks," Emily replied, settling into the chair across from her. "This is a nice surprise." Sophia stirred her coffee slowly. "I wanted to thank you, actually." "Thank me? For what?" "For saving my marriage." Sophia's eyes were serious despite her light tone. "After James told me about what happened at your house, things changed between us. We started talking again, really talking. He admitted he'd been feeling distant for months, but didn't know how to bring it up." Emily felt her cheeks warm slightly at the reference to the towel incident, but she was intrigued. "And my embarrassing moment helped somehow. It made him think about desire again, about seeing me with fresh eyes." Sophia took a sip of her coffee. We've been married 7 years. Somewhere along the way, we stopped really looking at each other. Emily nodded, understanding completely. That's exactly what happened with Mark and me. It's like we needed to be reminded that other people might find us attractive to remember why we were attracted to each other in the first place. Exactly. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes bright. James and I have been like newlyweds these past 2 weeks. He even surprised me with a weekend trip to the coast. As they continued talking, Emily felt a strange bond forming between them. What had started as an awkward situation had created this unexpected friendship, and she found herself sharing things with Sophia that she hadn't told anyone else. Mark keeps looking at me differently now, Emily confessed. More intensely. Like he's seeing me for the first time again. Sophia smiled knowingly. James is the same way. He can't keep his hands off me. She reached across the table and squeezed Emily's hand. Sometimes it takes something unexpected to shake us out of our routines. When Emily returned home that evening, she found Mark in the kitchen preparing dinner, something he rarely did. Music played softly in the background, and he had opened a bottle of wine. "What's all this?" Emily asked, setting down her purse. Mark crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a lingering kiss. "Just wanted to surprise you," he murmured against her mouth. "How was your coffee with Sophia?" "Nice. Really nice, actually." Emily leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent now mixed with spices from whatever he was cooking. "We talked about how things have changed, for all of us." Mark's hands slid down to her waist, holding her against him. "For the better, I think." "Definitely for the better," she agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him again. Over dinner, Mark surprised her again. "I was thinking maybe we should plan a getaway, just the two of us." Emily's heart skipped. "Really? When were you thinking? Next weekend? I already checked your calendar and you don't have anything that can't be moved." His eyes held that intense look that had become so familiar lately. "I want you all to myself. No friends walking in, no interruptions." Later that night, as they lay tangled in sheets, Emily's head on Mark's chest, she thought about how strange life could be. One mortifying moment had somehow led to this renewed passion, this rediscovery of each other. Mark's heartbeat was steady under her ear, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low in the darkness. Emily smiled against his skin. "Just that I never thought I'd be grateful for forgetting to check my phone messages." Mark's chuckle rumbled through his chest. "Best mistake you ever made." And as she drifted towards sleep in his arms, Emily had to agree. The cabin Mark had rented for their weekend getaway was perfect, secluded in the woods by a small lake, with a wraparound porch and large windows that let in streams of sunlight. Emily gasped when they pulled up the gravel driveway on Friday evening. "Mark, it's beautiful," she said, taking in the rustic wooden exterior and the peaceful surroundings. "How did you find this place?" He smiled as he turned off the engine. "Daniel's family owns it. He offered it when I mentioned wanting to take you somewhere special." Emily felt a flutter in her stomach at the mention of Daniel. It seemed their friends were now actively participating in this revival of their marriage, whether they realized it or not. Inside, the cabin was even more charming, with a stone fireplace and comfortable furniture. Large windows overlooked the lake, now golden in the setting sun. Mark brought in their bags while Emily explored, running her fingers over the smooth wooden countertops in the kitchen and testing the softness of the king-sized bed in the master bedroom. "What do you think?" Mark asked, coming up behind her in the bedroom and wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's perfect," she said, leaning back against his chest. "Just what we needed." Mark's lips found the sensitive spot below her ear. "No phones, no work, no unexpected visitors," he murmured against her skin. "Just you and me for the whole weekend." They spent that evening cooking dinner together, something they rarely had time for at home. As they moved around the kitchen, they couldn't seem to stop touching each other, a hand brushing an arm, fingers grazing a waist, a quick kiss while passing. It was like the early days of their relationship, when they couldn't bear to be near each other without some form of contact. After dinner, they sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The air was cool but not cold, scented with pine and the earthy smell of the forest. "Thank you for this," Emily said softly, her hand finding Mark's in the growing darkness. for remembering that we need time just for us. Mark squeezed her hand. I've been thinking a lot lately about how easy it is to take what we have for granted, to stop seeing each other clearly. His voice was thoughtful in the darkness. I don't want to make that mistake again. Emily turned to look at him, his face illuminated only by starlight and the dim glow from inside the cabin. Neither do I, she whispered. They made love slowly that night, rediscovering each other with gentle touches and whispered words. It was different from the urgent passion that had characterized their lovemaking since the incident with Mark's friends. More tender, more deliberate, but no less intense. The next morning, Emily woke to find Mark already up, coffee brewing in the kitchen. She wrapped herself in a robe and joined him, sliding her arms around him from behind as he stood at the stove. Good morning, she murmured, pressing a kiss between his shoulder blades. He turned in her arms, his eyes drinking her in. You look beautiful in the morning light, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. After breakfast, they went for a walk around the lake, holding hands and talking in a way they hadn't in years. Emily found herself sharing thoughts and dreams she'd almost forgotten she had. Mark listened intently, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. Remember when we first met? He asked as they reached a small dock that jutted out into the lake. At James's birthday party? Emily smiled at the memory. You spilled your drink on me and spent the next 10 minutes apologizing. Best mistake I ever made, Mark said, echoing his words from a few nights before. Though maybe not quite as good as you forgetting to check your phone messages. They both laughed, and Emily felt a surge of love for this man who had been her husband for 5 years, but suddenly felt new again. As they stood on the dock, the sun warm on their faces and the water lapping gently at the wooden pillars, Emily realized that sometimes it takes a moment of embarrassment to remind us of what truly matters. Sometimes we need to see ourselves through someone else's eyes to remember who we really are. And sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most beautiful awakenings. The weeks following their weekend getaway flew by in a haze of renewed passion and connection. Emily and Mark found themselves creating small moments of intimacy throughout each day. A lingering kiss before work, text messages filled with inside jokes and promises for later, spontaneous date nights in the middle of the week. It was as if they had rediscovered not just desire, but a deeper appreciation for each other's presence in their lives. One evening, as Emily was cooking dinner, her phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. She and James were hosting a small gathering at their place that weekend and wanted Emily and Mark to join them. Daniel would be there too, along with a few other friends. Should we go? Emily asked Mark as they sat down to eat. It might be nice to see everyone again. Mark reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in that way that always sent shivers up her arm. I'd like that. It seems like our friends have become even more important to us lately, in a strange way. Emily smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. Who would have thought that one embarrassing moment would lead to all of this? The night of the party arrived, and Emily dressed with particular care. She chose a deep green dress that Mark had always loved, the soft fabric skimming her curves in a way that was elegant but still held the promise of what lay beneath. When she emerged from the bedroom, Mark's eyes darkened with appreciation. Beautiful, he said simply, pulling her close for a kiss that threatened to make them late for the party. James and Sophia's home was warm and inviting, with soft music playing and the scent of Sophia's famous lasagna filling the air. Daniel was already there, chatting with a woman Emily hadn't met before. James introduced her as Kate, Daniel's new girlfriend. It's nice to finally meet you, Kate said, smiling warmly at Emily. Daniel's told me so much about all of you. Emily couldn't help wondering if that included the towel incident, but Kate's easy manner put her at ease. As the evening progressed, Emily found herself watching the dynamics between the 3 couples. There was something different about all of them. A heightened awareness, a deeper connection that seemed to fill the room with unspoken energy. During dinner, Sophia clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. I'd like to make a toast, she said, her eyes moving around the table before settling briefly on Emily with a knowing smile. To new beginnings and rediscoveries. Sometimes it takes seeing something in a new light to remember why we fell in love in the first place. Emily felt her cheeks warm as Mark's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. Everyone raised their glasses, and Emily saw the same look of quiet understanding passed between all 3 couples. Later, as they helped clear the dishes, Sophia pulled Emily aside in the kitchen. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly. "For what?" Emily asked, though she had a feeling she knew. "For starting this chain reaction among all of us." Sophia's eyes were bright with emotion. "James and I have never been happier. And now Daniel has found Kate, and they seem so good together." Emily shook her head, smiling. "I hardly think my embarrassing moment deserves credit for all of that. Sometimes a small spark is all it takes to light a much bigger fire," Sophia replied, hugging her briefly before they rejoined the others. On the drive home, Mark was quiet, his hand resting on Emily's thigh as he drove. The touch was both comforting and exciting, a familiar gesture that now held renewed meaning. "What are you thinking about?" Emily asked, covering his hand with hers. "How lucky I am," he said simply. "How close we came to letting our marriage become just habit and routine." Emily leaned over and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Not anymore," she whispered. When they arrived home, Mark didn't even wait until they were fully inside before pulling her into his arms, his kiss filled with a hunger that matched her own. They barely made it to the bedroom, leaving a trail of discarded clothes in their wake. Later, as they lay tangled together in the sheets, Emily realized that sometimes the most embarrassing moments in life become the most precious, the most transformative. Sometimes it takes being seen by others to remember how to truly see each other. 1 year had passed since that fateful day when Mark's friends had walked in on Emily in nothing but a towel. As Emily woke up on that anniversary morning, she smiled at the memory that once made her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but now filled her with a strange sort of gratitude. Mark wasn't in bed beside her, but she could hear movement in the kitchen and smell coffee brewing. She stretched lazily, enjoying the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the curtains they had forgotten to close the night before. When she finally made her way to the kitchen, she found Mark busy preparing breakfast, his back to her as he flipped pancakes on the stove. He was wearing only pajama bottoms, and Emily took a moment to admire the lines of his shoulders, the way his muscles moved beneath his skin. Even after 6 years of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart beat faster. "Good morning," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind and pressing a kiss between his shoulder blades. Mark turned in her arms, spatula still in hand, and smiled down at her. "Happy anniversary," he said, his voice still husky with sleep. Emily looked confused. "Our wedding anniversary isn't for another 3 months." Mark's smile widened as he set the spatula down and cupped her face in his hands. "Not that anniversary. It's been exactly 1 year since James and Daniel got an eyeful and our marriage got a second chance." Emily laughed, surprised and touched that he had remembered the date. "You kept track of that?" "Of course I did. It was the day I started seeing you again, really seeing you." His thumbs stroked her cheeks gently. "I have a surprise for you later." After breakfast, Mark was mysteriously tight-lipped about his plans, telling Emily only to pack an overnight bag and be ready by noon. When they got in the car, he still wouldn't reveal their destination, but Emily recognized the route they were taking after about 20 minutes of driving. "We're going to the lake cabin?" she asked, excitement building in her chest. Mark nodded, reaching across to take her hand. "Daniel said we could have it for the weekend again. I thought it would be fitting." The cabin looked just as beautiful as Emily remembered, though the surroundings were different in the height of summer than they had been during their spring visit. Wildflowers dotted the meadow near the lake, and the trees were lush with full green leaves. As they settled in, Emily noticed Mark seemed slightly nervous, checking his phone more often than usual and glancing at his watch. "Is everything okay?" she asked as they sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "Perfect," he assured her, though she could feel a tension in him. "I just want everything to be right." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the lake, Mark suddenly stood and held out his hand to her. "Come with me," he said softly. He led her down to the dock where they had stood a year before, reminiscing about how they first met. The wooden planks were warm beneath their bare feet, and the gentle lapping of water against the pillars created a soothing rhythm. At the end of the dock, Mark turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "This past year has been the best of our marriage," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That embarrassing moment turned out to be the greatest gift. It reminded me to never take you for granted, to see you every day as the beautiful, amazing woman you are." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes as Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a delicate ring with a single sapphire that caught the last rays of sunlight. "This isn't an engagement ring," he explained, "but a promised ring. A promise that I'll keep seeing you, really seeing you, every day for the rest of our lives." His eyes held hers intently. "Would you marry me again, Emily? Renew our vows here, just the two of us?" Emily couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks as Mark slipped the ring onto her finger above her wedding band. As the sun set over the lake, turning the water to liquid gold, they held each other close. Emily rested her head against Mark's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought about how life's most mortifying moments sometimes turn out to be its most precious gifts. What had started with embarrassment had led to rediscovery, reconnection, and now renewal, and she wouldn't change a single moment of it.